Good evening, witches, warlocks, sorcerers, and adepts, to the newest episode of Knights of the Nephilim podcast, brought to you by Celestial Oddities Radio. As always, I am your host on this mystic and mysterious journey that we call Magick. I am Reverend Frater Crow, and I want to thank you for listening in tonight. Whether listening live, streaming this after the fact, or you've downloaded this to your favorite device to have on the go, I want to thank you for your patronage and your support. But make sure you click the like, share, and follow button on whatever platform you're listening to us from iTunes to iHeartRadio, Spotify, Deezer, Spreaker, CastBox, Google Play, or Amazon Music. You name it, we're on it all, so listen where you feel most comfortable. But the more that you click those buttons, the more that it moves us up the podcast community rankings. More people that discover the show, allows you to stay in tune with all new episodes as they air, and gives you access to our archives so that you never miss a thing. And trust me, folks, if you're into the occult and the esoteric, there's something for absolutely everyone. If you are new to our show, we do bring you 3 episodes per month, Thursday nights, 8 to 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, talking over all things occult and esoteric, as I mentioned, interviewing and hosting great guests in the occult world, from authors to practitioners, ritual tool makers, historians on the occult, and everything in between. So if you are a fan, you will find and learn so much with this show, and I want to thank everyone who supported me so far in this journey. If you have any suggestions of things you would like to see, things you would like to see different, guests you would like to see us have on the show, feel free to drop us an email at celestialoddities@gmail.com. That is our parent company. Again, that is celestialoddities@gmail.com. I answer each and every message, comment, post, email every single day, so you never have to worry about being ignored. I will always get back to you, and I'm always, looking for your guys' feedback. As I mentioned earlier, we are on all platforms out there, but if you would like to listen to the show and also have the option of chatting with us during the show, our hosting company Spreaker, which is Spreaker, has an app, and you can tune in from their website. That'll allow you to listen in and use the instant messenger feature to talk to us during the show, ask us questions, ask our guests questions, leave feedback, and be a part of the conversation, and we always encourage that. So if you want to be a part of the show, jump in. I always read off your questions to our guests, and it makes it a really fun and festive thing, so feel free to do so now. I also want to thank our 4 sponsors that we have on the show, and that's right, ladies and gentlemen, we are now up to 4. Our 4 guests, or 4 sponsors, are going to be Goetic Impressions, Limitless Liberations, The Telemancer, and Dark Star Products. All 4 of these guys and gals make absolutely amazing ritual tools and ritual implementations that you can use during your rituals, during your ceremonies, during your meditations, that amplify and give a resonance to your work that just, I can stand behind all 4 companies, as I have work from all of them. And it's something that I truly believe in. I like to support people who I know have a passion in what they do, but also are very, true in their workings, and all 4 of these companies certainly are. So I want to jump in. I guess before I jump in, I do want to say, if you missed the last few episodes, make sure you jump back. We've had a slew of great guests recently. We did take 2 weeks off, and I think people were getting worried. They said, "Where have you guys been? What's going on here?" And I said, no, it just happened to be that we had 2 weeks in a row off. Like I said, we bring you a show, every 3 times a month, and then we have a show or a week off at the end of the month sometimes. It just happened that there was 2 back-to-back. So if you were worried, ladies and gentlemen, we are back. We have 3 episodes in a row before we take another break, and you won't miss a thing. So tonight's guest is someone who I've been watching for a little while. I've been certainly impressed with his work, with his videos, with his writings, and everything in between. This gentleman has a great future ahead of him in the occult world, and we want to tell you a little bit about him, and we will bring him on the line. For those folks listening in tonight, you know who I'm talking about. Aserial Krabat. He has embarked on the path of magic since his early childhood days, and has been a devoted practitioner of the left-hand path for over 5 years. He has dedicated his life to the metaphysical sciences, witchcraft, magic, and pagan spirituality, while diving into many adversarial currents like Luciferianism, Ahrimanic sorcery, Satanism, to continuously evolve his spirit and mind in order to ascent and expand his consciousness. in spirit through spiritual ascension. Aserial aspires to educate and liberate himself and all of humanity by creating stunning pieces of occult literature and stunning visual pieces of art through multiple media outlets like YouTube and everything in between. And if you are a fan of his, you're going to learn a lot more about him tonight. If you are new to his work and to who he is, you are going to certainly discover who he is tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, Aserial Krabat, how you doing tonight, brother?
Well, hello there. I'm doing super awesome. Thanks for having me on, man.
No, not a problem. It's long overdue. I've been, like I said, watching your work for a while now. I'm impressed with everything that you've put out, and I think it's time to certainly bring you on Nights of the Nephilim and pick your brain, find out who you are, a little bit about your history, and, just kind of shoot the breeze with you on some different metaphysical and spiritual, topics. So I once again want to thank you for coming on. But if you have listened to the show, and we always like to start out traditional, and I ask each and every guest that comes on, the traditional question to start an interview. How did you start out? What led you to the occult? What led you to this path? How did you become who you are right now?
All right. Well, that's sort of the best question that I always get, because it's sort of sometimes difficult to pinpoint that. But I can essentially say that it all started when I was a child, where I was always wondering if there would be something more to the world than, the reality that we live in. Because, when you grow up, especially around when I grew up in the early 2000s, the media and our, current society never really talks about spirituality in the sense that, there's more to it than the normal religions that I grew up in, as I grew up in a Catholic state. So that was always sort of hidden from me. And what I mean hidden is that the spiritual aspect of nature was not really talked about. So I always wondered if there would be, more behind what we're taught in school and in church. And then I just sort of stumbled across something, which is called magic and the more esoteric means and philosophies of our world. And I started to become very interested in, slight and light topics like Wicca, witchcraft, from an early age. And I started collecting books on that. And I just, as a child, I sort of grew into that with play, but not really taking it too seriously, but having the imagination of a child and walking through a fantastical world. And then once I grew older and I started to mature as a human being and developed as a egoic self and as a character, I started questioning more and our society. And then I just, sort of gradually went from the more lighter aspects of magic, like Wicca, and the more pagan paths, to the left-hand path, essentially. And that's when my whole path working and practice really started to kick off tenfold and 10x, because that's when I started to really practice and dive in heavily into ritual work, gnosis. I started to learn how to use my own powers as a spiritual being here on this plane to, create my own reality, essentially.
No, I mean, it makes sense. And there's a pivotal stage, and I think it was said very well in the Works of Darkness by E.A. Goetic, that he listed the 5 different stages of a black magic practitioner, and it starts out as the dabbler. And you kind of mess around here and there, and you're messing with different things, but you don't know really what you're getting into. You don't know what it's going to turn into. You're just kind of there. And then it kind of leads into the neophyte, where you start reading all the materials and you start really diving in a little bit more, and then it leads into the practitioner. And by that stage is when a lot of times you have picked your path, such as yourself picking black magic and the left-handed path, and that's when it starts. That's when you really start having results. And from there, it just goes throughout the various stages and just amplifies, which brings me to a good point. When, if you don't mind sharing with us, when was the moment that you had your first, holy shit, wow moment? I mean, we all have great moments, even starting out at the very beginning, but there is always, with all of us, that one moment that just changed your life forever.
Yeah, so that one moment goes back to my early teens, when I had my samadhi, essentially, when I had the realization of that I am not, that body, essentially just that, and my egoic self, that I am more than that, and then I'm nothing at the same time. And when I had that conscious awakening, well, expanding my consciousness through very logical reasons, actually, and then gradually moving from the logical information that was put into my brain and then accessing that on the spiritual levels and really awakening to the epiphany, or sort of what you could call enlightenment. That was the moment for me when, it sort of hit me, and I was like, well, damn, if I'm not that, if I'm more than that, and I'm really God, essentially, if I'm just, one aspect of creation itself, what more is there to find, and what more can I really bring down and learn from me and the world? And that's when I started to really dive heavily into the occult, and started having the first, wow, this is fucking crazy moments by channeling a spirit within the circle that I've placed in the middle of the night when I was still living with my parents. And I was sort of practicing, for a year or so, and I sort of, started to understand how the certain implements and scientific approaches to that work. And I started having small successes, but then that moment happened when I was in a trance state, and I was not really having any light within my child's room back then. So I just, was sitting in complete darkness, and the spirit that I was calling for back then appeared right in front of me, and it looked darker than darkness itself, and it moved at me, and I could see two eyes glowing from that darkness. And it was not really a visualization or something that I was seeing with my third eye on a different level. I was sort of seeing it almost with my physical eyes. It's really hard to explain. And that was that moment when I was like, okay, fuck this, I'm out. Because it was so crazy, because I was not used to that. But of course that intrigues you, and it brings you back into the circle. So I would kind of pinpoint that as one of the first moments that sort of opened me up to, everything that I'm doing right now.
And that's all it takes. It just takes that one moment that's a life changer, that is either going to do one of two things. It's going to either have you running for the hills scared, or it's going to have you, enthralled and just diving deeper. Or maybe it's a mixture of both. Maybe at first you're scared and you're like, what did I do? But then for the real occultist, for the real black magician and sorcerer, it leads you back to that, where you're like, what did I do? I kind of like that. What else can I do? Because as you said, as you go through samadhi, when you go through that awakening and realization of you are everything but you are nothing, and you really hit the inner depths of yourself, you realize that if you are God, or at least a fractal of God, then that right there in itself is a massive thing that most people never reach or can really understand. But once you hit that realization, then you realize, well, if I am a part of God, or God himself, then I am endless and can do anything. I just need to learn how. You don't know how to walk until you're taught how to walk. And that's really what this is you learn how to walk again in different ways. And once you learn how to walk, you learn how to run, you learn how to sprint, you learn how to jump. And it all starts from that one whoa moment.
Yeah, exactly. And once you have that, wow moment, and you are intrigued, you definitely want to continue, doing these things, and, finding out what else could be possible. And then you start building that momentum, and you continue to walk down that path. And and from there, the most of the greatest things will manifest and happen within our lives.
Now I want to ask you a question about that, because, I bet it would have been hard for you. And for those not listening right now, Aserial is in a major different time zone right now. What time is it right now, brother?
For me, it's 2 a.m. in the morning.
And that's the shit that I'm talking about right there. That's dedication, folks. It's 8 p.m. here. It is 2 a.m. where he's at doing this interview. And for anybody to stay up late into the night, 3, almost 4 in the morning to finish this interview tonight, that's dedication to your craft. But you were coming to us from Germany, and I'm sure that would have been difficult as well, because as you said, there's not, or at least I would imagine in the early 2000s, maybe it started to be a little bit more open. But I would imagine there wasn't a whole lot of acceptance of anything left-hand path or anything really occult, even still maybe, but especially back then. And when I was growing up, I know that there wasn't over there. So can you explain to us what that was like, almost being not only kind of secluded to yourself in this practice, but also it not being accepted really around you?
Yeah, so I was always really the odd one out, and I was always sort of like the solitary guy that was, still, even when like going to I don't know, 5th grade or something, where you're a little bit older, playing with myself and really having a huge fantasy. So I always like just like stuck to myself. I had friends for sure, but I was always the weird one. But necessarily when it comes to left hand path, and especially the more occult stuff of that, because I was still young and because I was still practicing, I kept a lid on that, to just really keep that for myself. While I was definitely talking about spiritual subjects, because I was experiencing it back then at a very young age, especially after Samadhi, and I had these moments where I had to essentially go to my parents and told them, hey, by the way, I am God, and they're like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. You okay? It's like, yeah, I'm fine, and you really not come back to a moment of who you used to be after that. Well, you can still sort of associate yourself with, the labels that were put onto you, because they keep calling you by that name. But when you're a child or you're younger, it's a very difficult process to integrate that back within normal society. So I had my spiritual awakenings, and I had these moments of, essentially God mind states and of trance, but I kept that to my magical practice at night. So I used to go through my daily life, go to school, then do homework, meet my friends, just be a child or a teenager, do what teenagers do, and then after I had some free time for myself, I really dived into the occult and started to study more and practice, and really just sort of kept my door shut. While of course it was definitely noticed by my parents. So my mother was always a little bit cautious, telling me even from a very early age as a child, when there was a moment, I think I was 7 years old, where all of a sudden I was like wearing a monk's cloak back then, and I was lighting some candles, and I was drawing a pentagram with some black ink on parchment, while not knowing really why I was doing that. And she stumbled upon it, and she was like, you can't do that, that's evil, that will lead you down a dark path. So she always knew that I was always like interested into these things, so she was cautious about it and told me be careful, but she never really knew what it was about. And the more I grew with it, the older I got, I could explain more, and then I just gradually opened up to it. So that's sort of how I started when I really heavily dived into the left hand path, back then, or more like magic. And yeah, sort of like keep it for myself until I expressed it openly and came out of my broom closet.
No, that makes sense. It is something personal. I mean, for a lot of people out there, it's not something that they will ever openly tell another person that they're into. They could be, an amazing sorcerer, and you've known them your whole life and never have a clue, because they keep it very, very hidden and very to themselves, which to each their own. And then there are the personalities out there, the authors, the practitioners for hire. There are, people such as yourself or myself. When we're out here, I do the radio. There are people who want to put this knowledge out, to plant the seeds, to grow the forest of knowledge out there, because there are so many people searching and don't know where to find this. Because I can tell you, I've spent thousands and thousands of hours in my life reading books, hundreds and hundreds of books, practicing hundreds and hundreds of rituals, perfecting different things, and I think that's needed in a sense. But at the same time, I know how many years and how many nights I sat lost until I found myself, that I feel if I can plant those seeds and help progress that, I don't want to just completely give it away. I think that work is needed, as I said, but if I can progress that a little bit, I think that that's important. And that's something you're doing with your work. You're reaching people. You are having people in the occult community watch your videos and read your books, and helping them learn steps that might have taken them otherwise a lot longer to learn.
Yes, exactly. And that sort of became my goal. I mean, after, I had my awakening and I started practicing and I learned stuff and I had, results with it. And I was like, I need to share this with the world somehow. And then I started to really like plan out how I could, what I have learned and experienced, bring to the world, and essentially also my generation, and just give them access to something that they never had access to, especially to the more occult topics of spirituality, which is still, put into a corner by the neo-pagans and by neo-spiritualism and the New Age movement. It's important that we go back to the traditions, but just sort of repackage that for the new age that we're in right now, to broaden the horizons of as many people as we can. because that happens when you have an awakening. It creates a ripple effect and a domino effect where you want to share that knowledge by expanding your consciousness automatically.
You do. I mean, it's once you have that aha moment, like we said, it's tough not to want to wake everyone up. You have to know you can't wake everyone up, and you don't want to be that guy that shoves it on everybody, but you also want to be that guy that you kind of let be known that, hey, if you were looking for an awakening, I can help you with that. And there's a whole different world beyond the illusion that you see, because that is exactly what we live in. We live in a programmed illusion, from childhood of who we think we are, who we think the world, or what we think the world is. Everything from the colors we see to the names and the languages we use, all of that was instilled into us by another human being who was instilled into them by another human being. And it's just the ripple down effect of programming from a young age that sometimes that's not necessarily a bad thing, but sometimes you have to break that programming. You have to impart your own pieces of code into the matrix system to change and see what's really behind the curtain. And that's really what magic is it's hacking. It's reality hacking. And you can really start to see things beyond what people realize. And as you said, when you have that aha moment, that's what you want to do, is you want to just share that with everyone and say, hey, like, you're asleep right now. Would you like to wake up?
Yes, exactly. Because, once you have looked behind the illusion of Maya, that everything is not really solid and that everything is that illusionary point of everything is constantly changing and evolving itself, you also become an intricate part of that. And you want to spread that knowledge to as many people as you can without waving it into their face, without their consent, like sort of religions are doing it. But because we have certain upbringings through religions or whatever, was your programming as a child, as a teenager or young adult, that is a constant process of reprogramming yourself and your mind, while integrating that with your higher self and your spirit, so that you can fully become the center of your universe and not only just start hacking and manipulating, but just emanating pure creation as you see fit and as you like to be, which is the core principle of the left-hand path, essentially.
Exactly. There's a point beyond knowing, and it's just living, just breathing and being. And it takes a long time to get there, but when you get there, it's a wonderful stage. And I think it finds the people that it needs to find. Sometimes those sparks turn into fire, sometimes they die out. But if it turns into a fire, that means you had reached the person who really wanted to learn that. Because it seems that a lot of people don't know they're even into this path until it hits them like a freight train. All of a sudden, they see something, they hear something, they read something, and it starts a fire instantly. And they're like, well, I need to read another book and watch a podcast and do this and do that. And the next thing you know, it becomes an obsession, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's that once you get put onto the path of truth, it's hard not to want to continue that. You don't want to go back to the illusion, and the world will try to pull you back into that. There are rules that were put into place at the beginning of time that try to keep you into that mainframe. And so you have to constantly, as you said, remind yourself, who and what you are, to keep breaking that illusion until you reach a point where you don't have to do that anymore.
Yes, exactly. And I think the ones that are meant for, a certain path, they always have been on that path without knowing it, as you said. Because, creation is endless. It's infinite. And therefore you have every kind of energy, idea, creation that could exist within existence. Everything is possible. So therefore you have different energy types or different path philosophies that sort of are an intricate part of who you are as well, and what sort of like vibes with you and what goes with your energy structure and your soul and what you are about. So, it doesn't really matter when you start doing this, because time essentially is an illusion from how we see it as a human being. Is not really a line. It's an ever-expanding moment of now. And therefore, once you are doing that in the future, you have already done that and you're already connected to that. So in that sense, it doesn't matter if you're starting to be interested in that because, you stumble upon something, or because your future is sort of like evolving in like, manipulating how you're moving towards the future. That is sort of the paradox, because both things, are valid within that.
No, I agree. And I think that really, one of the ways I've always looked at magic was that if you look at the multiverse theory of everything is happening right now as we speak. 1 million of us are doing 1 million different things in 1 million different lives all at the same exact time. Then when you do magic, all you are doing is you are harmonizing two individual frequencies. The one that you are currently living in now with the one that you foresee yourself in the future. So you tune this one to that one, going up a scale and then bringing it down a scale until you're harmonizing. And the next thing you know, that thing you're shooting for comes to fruition and happens because you're harmonizing the frequencies. And that's what magic is it's at least the way I look at it, is it's all happening right now. It's just the you that you are right now just doesn't know it until you bring it into harmony with one another. So it's definitely a great and powerful tool. But I wanted to ask you, and it's something I've asked several of my guests. As we talked about growing up, you came from a Christian background, which is always interesting, I think. Most of my guests that are black magicians, that are Satanists, that are heavy on the left-hand path, such as myself, grew up in a Christian background. And a lot of times people can say, oh, it's just you guys rebelling. I think what it is that it doesn't sit right with us. That, a lot of people are raised in Christianity, but most people accept that there are those few that it just doesn't sit well with you, and you have to explore more. And that's what leads you, I think. The repulsion of the fact that you don't believe what you're being taught causes you to actually go to another route. So it's not rebelling and trying to be the rebel. It is that it doesn't sit well, and it leads you to other avenues, and then you find what resonates with you, like you said, whether it be left-hand path, whether it be something completely different. It might be Buddhism or Hinduism. It might be Taoism. It could be just an immense amount of paths. But do you feel that it's hard or easy for you to remain friends with anyone in the Christian path? So, for myself, I find it challenging that I do certainly have some Christian friends, and we just don't really talk about religion much. But do you find it difficult to remain close to anybody who might have had the same upbringing that you once had?
Yeah, it all depends on the person necessarily. Now, I do not really have many friends that are like hardcore devoted Christians. That just never really was a big case. But I was a church boy. Like, I was an altar boy. Like, I was actually in the church doing service when I was a kid. And sort of like, growing out from that and then stopping it, you sort of like, you just move away from your old friends, you make new ones. But I essentially, I don't have a problem with Christians at all, or any kind of, faith that, someone might practice it. As long as they don't, again, wave their religion and their, way of looking at the world right in your face, because their truth is the only truth. And that's sort of, what brings us to, maybe the more adversarial paths on left-hand path, principles and philosophies, because, of the sort of oppression type that comes from the Judeo-Christian religions. But, I don't really have an issue with them. I don't have an issue with people. It's the controlled religion organizations that I have an issue with. But normally, if I ever meet Christians, normally I don't bring up the discussion at all, and I just sort of like downplay something if there's something brought up, because as a magician, especially on the left-hand path, you do sort of become the wolves in sheep's clothing sometimes, depending on your situation. Because if you want to be looked at and stared at and you ask all the questions, you can certainly go for that. But you can also sort of, just go with the flow and be just a part of, the general populace wherever you are, until you are, ready or fine again to just, expand yourself again, and then not be locked down or sort of limited in who and what you are.
No, I agree. I kind of look at it very similarly. I don't mind anyone being or studying whatever they want to study. I am friends with people who have very vast and different belief structures and systems than I do. And I'm sure if we really dug into it, and some of them actually, we do like to pick each other's brain and throw ideas back and forth. But for the most part, we know that there's that fine line of let's not discuss, because I'm not saying that my path is the ultimate truth, and I certainly am not saying that theirs is, but everyone's entitled to have that belief. And I think even though we are, you and I and many others are more teachers of the occult, we are the smart ones to know that there's a time and place for it. And that's why we present ourselves in a certain way that the people find us that need to find us. We don't go looking for them, because that's when you find trouble, because you start to put your views out there to people who certainly I don't think would agree with our path. And you know, that brings me to a question is what, when you started letting it be more known publicly that you are a black magician, what was the biggest misunderstanding that you got from people that you knew, or even strangers that had maybe come across you? What was that one thing that you felt was the biggest misunderstanding about your path?
Well, they all thought I went crazy, you know. They all found that's it, you know. He's completely gone. He's off his rockers. Because when I fully became public about it, I was actually not living in Germany. I was living in Canada. And over there, I just had, you know, all the time for myself. I didn't know anyone except of my family that's living there. So I was like, you know what, fuck it. You know, I'm out in the open now. I wanted to do projects on the occult, do videos anyway. And that's when I started with this. And, you know, people were like, okay, what the hell is happening over there? I was like, that's interesting to see. You know, there were some social interactions over social media. But once I came back, you know, a few people, you know, that I knew were asking me, like, are you going through an emo phase, or like what's happening with you? Like, are you Satanist? Did you sell your soul? And then, you know, these sort of discussions came up where, like, my parents sort of still accepted me for who I was. You know, they knew that I was practicing magic and you know, these type of things. They just never really understood it. My friends stayed true to me. They liked me for, you know, who I was and who I am. And that was never really a point of discussion with, you know, certain people, where it's just like, oh, okay, that's just Aserial. You know, he's doing his thing, and I'm doing mine. But definitely there was for sure some backlash where, for example, I came back to one of our favorite pubs that we used to go to before Corona. And I came in, nothing had really changed, while myself had changed completely. I was not the same person anymore, and everything was sort of like stagnant back there. And everyone was like sort of staring at me, and I, you know, got a lot of bad looks, because now I was openly expressing that on my sleeve and on my T-shirts, because, you know, I was really vibing with it. It's like, hey, fuck it. You know, I am a magician, and I do like to share that with the world. And then, you know, you have people coming to me saying, you know, what you're doing is wrong. You can't do this. You're still young. You have no idea. And then it comes back to the ignorance of some people that, you know, grew up within a certain religion and never questioned anything about reality, and just sort of accept the food that are being served all the time. And then, you know, you can either outsmart them in that moment and have a nice discussion, or, you know, be the smarter one, depending on the situation, and just, you know, gradually accept their belief and saying that's all right, and, you know, just go on with your day, and not really giving them the satisfaction of starting a discussion with them.
And I think that's important. You have to know to pick and choose your battles, as there are times, many times, where if someone is against my view or know what I am about, and they come at me, because I don't openly talk to most people about it unless it's brought up to me, other than obviously my radio shows and my social media and things. But like when I'm out and about, you know, if someone approaches me and has an idea or a viewpoint of what I do in a contrary sense, usually I just walk away and say, hey man, I'm sorry you feel that way, but it is what it is. You know, I do you, I'll do me. But there is those fun times where I will just destroy someone on their own background of their own culture, especially Christianity. As I'm not someone who just blindly walks. I have studied theology of many, many backgrounds, from Hinduism to Buddhism to Christianity to, you know, Abrahamic, you know, backgrounds and everything in between. So I love when someone will come there spouting their viewpoint in opposition of you, because there's so much an allegiance of their religion, but then when you start to really pick at them, they don't even know their own religion. And it happens so often, especially in Christianity, where they seem to be the most opinionated on things a lot of times, but they are also most of the time the same people who have never read the Bible. They don't know the original Bible, not the one that they have now that has been transformed multiple times with additives and subtractions out of that book. But you start to get these people who blindly follow a faith that they don't actually even practice or fully understand. So like you said, I most of the time just shut my mouth and I just smile and say, hey man, I'm sorry you feel that way. But every now and again, there's those fun moments where I'm like, all right, you crossed the line and now it's time to ruin you. And those are always good times. So no, good conversation on that. And I wanted to jump to the next question now, and it was one that we were kind of talking about earlier, because you had said since the beginning, even though you have and do work with other practitioners from time to time, you are mainly a solitary practitioner, as am I. But I like to ask solitary practitioners this question. Is, what is your thoughts on lodge magic compared to the solitary path? Do you feel that a solitary practitioner can reap the same benefits and power on their own as someone who is in a classical order that trains with other people, learns and ritualizes with other people? Or do you feel that they have an advantage over someone because of those facts? What is your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that the solitary practitioner can go beyond the very confines of what a temple and order puts onto you with rules and other traditions. Absolutely, because it's not just that's my opinion, because that's how I grew up and that's how I practice. It's you can always look into some sort of lodges and orders that we know of. Now, we do not know every secret society, because that's the point of being secret societies. They're secret. But when you look at, the Rosenkreuz Orden, or the Rosenkreuz Order, the Templars, or even the Illuminati, and all these other famous orders that are out there, you start to see that, where their practice comes from, especially the lodges that were formed in the 1700s, 1600s, 1800s, there's a lot of Judeo-Christian influence on that as well when it comes to Judeo-Christian magic. And a lot of that is really influenced by that. So I always think that the left-hand path practitioner is sort of a solitary one, because, it's all centered around your own self, by, becoming who you really are and striving for that. But you can definitely work with others, because you can still amplify your power. So if two souls connect and their powers together, you can always create something that is even beyond what you could be capable of just by yourself. But I do think that the solitary witch or magician sorcerer is able to break out of the confines and the rules and the layers of walls that might be placed around you with certain restrictions.
I like that. You said a couple key points there that I think stand out to me is you don't have, I should say you can break out of those confines that they put on you in an order. And I think that works for a good reason, is because you might not have that backbone. And a lot of times people think having that backbone behind you is a good thing. Like, you have someone to fall back on, you have a support system, and it can be, but it can also be a crutch, because frustration can cause amazing magic to happen. When you try something over and over again and you fail over and over again on your own with no one to tell, no one to lean to, no one to talk to, and no one to support you, that frustration builds until it reaches that boiling point, that tipping point. And then you put all of that into that same ritual that you've done 40 times that didn't work, and then all of a sudden it does. And that type of feeling cannot be had when you have someone there teaching you, when you have someone there holding you up. Sometimes you must fall to learn how to stand, and that doesn't happen a lot of times in orders. And also, as you said, they teach you their way. You're learning a structured form of magic, and sometimes magic shouldn't be structured. Sometimes it has to be the chaos until you formulate the chaos into your own practice. Because you nailed it on the head. A lot of these orders, whether they're summoning daemons, whether they're doing multiple facets of different types of magic, or even disguise themselves as black magic, a lot of them stem from history and from other groups and things that come from a Judeo, background, a Christian background. I mean, look at the Rosicrucians, look at the Golden Dawn, look at Ordo Templi Orientis, formed by Aleister Crowley. All these different things certainly did do work with a lot of good and so-called evil spirits, but they all do so in the light of a Christian formulated formula. And that to me is kind of strange that I myself was a part of the Golden Dawn for a while, and I left it because, I mean, that's a whole different story for another day, but I mean, they heavily try to push, this Christian background on you disguised in other ways, and it's strange to me that, that so many of these places and these organizations do that. Now, some of them are more open about it. I mean, Golden Dawn's not out of touch to say that they are that type of background, but there are other darker style lodges that I know of that still do the same thing. They're deriving themselves, from Solomonic tradition. They're pulling from the Goetia and the Ars Notoria and these different books that are all from a Judeo-Christian stemming. And it's weird to me is that you need to ditch all this. Sometimes you can't go off that. You have to just figure it out yourself, because if you're true to yourself, then you know that the work is true.
Yes, absolutely. But one thing that we have to consider is that these people back then were products of their time and zeitgeist. Nowadays, it's completely different because we have access to the knowledge of the entire world, but just with the click of a finger, you're there. You can research anything on the internet, and that's why I'm sort of a different generation as well, because I grew up with the internet when it just really first sort of came out. And I grew up with it, and, you just had access to certain information. And then while you were going through spiritual stuff, awakenings and practicing, learning about magic through traditional ways and books, you could also research and, look at videos. And that's sort of, where I started doing all of this, is by not really going to the old books of Aleister Crowley, Thelema, the Golden Dawn, but really taking, especially from EA Wedding, seeing that on YouTube and just, watching the free content, and then just, ticking off, my experience with what others were having. It's yes, that makes sense. Okay, yeah, that's in line with me. Oh yeah, okay, let me try that. And then, practicing, continue to clock in essentially in a ritual circle on your altar, and then having experiences, magically with spirits or manifestations of spells and rituals, and then seeing that, what works, what doesn't work, and then just kind of move with that. And that's, I think it's the best way to grow. Once you sort of have the basics in, go to the ancient gods, devas, daemons, doesn't really matter what you want to work with, and learn directly from that, because it's sort of unfiltered and it's not really poisoned or looked through a lens or a filter that is made by humanity.
No, you nailed it. As you go to the source. Don't go to the things that form their own formings from the sources. Go to the source themselves. Drink from the spring, and you'll learn the knowledge directly firsthand, and then you can create whatever you want to it and from it. And I had to kind of do that as I went through different waves in life, where I started out as a solitary practitioner and for years learned myself, and then I was like, what, maybe I'm missing something by not being a part of these orders. So then I did work with some different orders, and I learned a lot of things, don't get me wrong, but at the same time I'm like, this just doesn't seem me. It doesn't fit. So then I went back to being solitary, and honestly, I'll probably never work with a lodge again, and except for maybe on certain workings, that if I'm working with a lodge on something, but I don't think I'll see myself being a part of another order again, other than Ordo Al Gol, which is specifically a left-hand path demonic summoning system, from Arundel Overman, who is one of my favorite authors and occultists of all time. So it just depends, but I don't do the traditional, OTO, Thelema, Golden Dawn anymore. I just can't see it. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with these organizations. They're very successful, but I think there is very much power to be had by being all alone. Now, before we jump more into some other topics that I want to jump into with you, I want to give a shout out to some of my sponsors. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go over a couple of the different groups that, help out our show, and I certainly support. And first and foremost, we're going to go over Limitless Liberation, and I always read this from the viewpoint of Elena, who's the owner, and she says that Limitless Liberation was inspired by both Lucifer and Belial. Lucifer has been with me most of my life, as far back as I can remember. Belial and I started to work when I was going through a very difficult part of my life. He completely turned mine and my family's life around for the better in a very short period of time. In return, he asked me to create charger for him. He showed me the designs, so I created the first charger for Belial, and Lucifer wanted one next. From there, I had spirits lining up, requesting magical items. Some are control freaks, others will just inspire. They are also individually different, but every single item created has power within it. Each item operates on many levels. They operate as an anchor for the spirit you're working with, thus aiding easier connection between the two of you. They also operate like a power cell or battery, where they already come with an inherent energy to them, but they become stronger as they feed and pull from during ritual, as well as strengthen your workings. Limitless Liberation continues to grow to honor the spirits that we love to work with and build relationships with. And you can check out Elena's work at etsy.com/shop/limitless liberation. And again, that's etsy.com/shop/limitless liberation. Everything is custom, tailor-made, handmade items that are gorgeous, that you can feel the energy by just looking at them through the pictures, let alone once you get one of her amazing pieces on your altar. I support her and her work, and I promise you, if you get something from her or something for one of your loved ones who is a practitioner, they will notice the difference instantly. Now, I also want to give some love to Goetic Impressions, a company I've been working with for quite a while. And Goetic Impressions formed as a partnership between Ben, Frater Adamastor, and Sor Alara, with the intention to bring ritual-accurate magical tools to the public for affordable prices. One of the largest barriers to entry for new practitioners looking to experiment with the magic of the Western grimoires is how expensive and difficult to find real ritual tools are. They first launched with a Kickstarter to bring their Goetic medallions to life, and since then have also expanded to an Enochian toolset, and most recently to a satanic medallion and altar set, which is currently live on Kickstarter. With over 20 years of magical and occult experience across a range of traditions, Goetic Impressions is the place to find affordable, high-quality ritual items. And folks, they make everything from altar cloths to candles to crystal balls with sigils in the middle to talismans to the Enochian tool sets to the brand new Enochian angel medallions, which just launched and isn't even a part of their bio that they gave me way back when we started working together. But it is beautiful. They got some powerful workings for anybody who wants to do angelic magic as well, which I certainly partake in as well. So we want to give them love. I also, not to draw this out too much, but I also have a promo code for them. So if you are looking for that, I make you work for it. Make sure you message me on Knights of the Nephilim on Facebook or through my email at celestialoddities@gmail.com, and I'll give you a 10% off of your overall order through Goetic Impressions. And lastly, we got the one and only Telemancer. There's a lot to be said about James. James, Ralston has been a member of the Order of the Voltec starting in 2008 and progressing through several degrees, and last serving as head of the Outer Order. The Order of the Voltec is an offshoot of the pylon of the Temple of Set, originated to study and practice several forms of the sorceress methods, centering on techniques used by Mexican and other Central American priests and magicians. Many of the techniques involved were popularized in the late 1970s and 1980s by Carlos Castaneda, one of my favorite writers of all time. Now, it says that over the decades since his first experience with magic, his desire has grown into the creation and use of what other shamanic sorcerers term as power objects, talismans, amulets, totems, and other powerful objects. His interest expanded to the degree that he has chose to become an apprentice of several Appalachia's premier craftspeople and learn the art of metalcraft to produce power objects for both himself and select patrons. He has been metalworking for over 8 years. He works in silver, gold, pewter, and some other metals from time to time occasionally. He creates talismanic pendants, rings, and altarpieces, almost exclusively by custom commission. And you can check him out by searching The Telemancer on Facebook or by going to facebook.com/The Telemancer, followed by the number 1. His work is stunning. I mean, his rings, his amulets, his pendants are top-notch. They're some of the best that I've ever seen. So make sure you check out all 3 of our sponsors. Now, earlier you might have heard me say that I have 4. Our newest sponsor, which actually doesn't even launch till next week, but I just wanted to kick him in a little bit early because I like to do that, is going to be Dark Star Productions. His products are amazing. He makes just the feel and vibe to his work is dark to a sense that just tingles my inner aura, and I love it. And about Dark Star Products is it's custom-made occult oils, powders, waters, bags, poppets, ornaments, amulets, all witchcraft-related services under the form of his religion, which is demonolatry. So it has a very dark and sinister feel to it. I have 2 amazing hand-custom pieces, literally 3 feet to my left right now on my altar, and I work with them heavily, and I can't even begin to tell you some of the work that me and these pieces have done together and been able to accomplish. So once again, check out all of our sponsors. Make sure you watch out for a more detailed and full bio next week of Dark Star products. And, thank you guys so much for everything you do for the show. So, folks, we have been hanging out for the last 50 minutes with Aserial Krabat and talking over his history, his upbringing, his initiatory works into magic and the path that have led him up to this point so far. Now, before we took our break to talk about our sponsors, he had mentioned his story is a little bit different than a lot of ours who are a little bit older, where, he was fortunate enough to grow up in the internet age where it was around from the time he was very young. So it allowed access to things like YouTube and to different sites where you could find free material from across the globe, all at the click of a button, where at one point in time, I know, speaking for myself, it was very hard to come across grimoires and books. It was a lot of searching. Now, he had mentioned coming across free videos from amazing sorcerers and black magicians like E.A. Goetic, who, obviously runs Become a Living God, and, Aserial is a part of that team. So I wanted to ask you, how did that all come about? I mean, obviously you watched this man perform and talk about amazing material to then ultimately becoming a part of his team. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. When I saw his YouTube videos, I was baffled because I'm like, what the fuck? This dude is really openly talking about these things, and he's giving so much good information out, which was totally in line with what I had experienced and also came across through my studies. So I just started following his stuff through various social media platforms, without even really buying too much product or coming from his old background of being an author and writing all these amazing books. Once again, coming back to the whole Generation Z of the internet. And then I just, started to really, listen and watch the content. And because I also grew as a sorcerer, I always knew that one day, when I feel ready to jump out and say, hey, here I am, that I would have an access to that. And then it just sort of manifested. And from there, starting to put my own gnosis and knowledge out to the world, it created some sort of waves and people started to notice me. And therefore, I just, took the opportunities that were in front of me. It's like, hey, why not write a book? Because I was working with Luciferianism, and then it all kind of grew from there, where me and Eric, started to become friends in the background. And then we started to work together on projects and other stuff. And I just sort of became part of the whole team.
No, that's amazing. It's just one of those things that life's tricky in that way, that you meet someone or see someone's work that resonates with you, and it sparks changes inside yourself and helps grow you as a practitioner to ultimately then end up working with this gentleman and then ultimately becoming a part of his team, which is amazing, which led you to writing, a book for yourself, which I would like to talk about now, which is Kings of God, and that is Luciferianism, the Lord of Pax. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that? I know that not only did you release it as a book, but now recently it has also been made into an audio version as well. So can you tell us a little bit, about the process of writing this book, your feelings and thoughts during that time, and then also a little bit about the book itself?
Yes, absolutely. Well, so I was in a very difficult situation back then where that was around the time when I came back from Canada, and I was openly and publicly, expressing myself, and the sort of reality and, the occupations of what you have to do or your expectations from my parents and society kind of grabbed me by the balls and was like, okay, you're back now. Now, what do you want to do with your life? Where do you want to go? What do you want to do as a career? What's your path? And I didn't really feel comfortable with anything because I was always a free thinker, and I always, because of Magick, had a problem of listening to people that had way more solar returns than I had, but were essentially spiritual infants within a body, of a human adult. So there was always that aspect. But I essentially I thought that, what, I will one day definitely do something spiritual as a part of my career, without really wanting to be fully public and becoming a ritual for hire and an artist and an influencer. And was more like, let's go to plants, because I always had an interest in that. But to get into this, I had to start an apprenticeship as a gardener to get where I wanted to be at that time. So I started this whole apprenticeship and training, and I think around after half a year, I just noticed that this was not for me at all, because I now had to go back to school, which I was not in for at least 3 years. There were people around me that I totally did not vibe with at all, and I had to constantly work the 9-to-5 job, and doing a really hard work, out in the fields, with really less little payment. Where I would have completed my training, I would have earned almost as much as someone that would work at McDonald's, maybe a little bit more. So I was like, you know what? Why am I doing this to myself? So after half a year, I just decided to quit. And it's so when I quit, how do I quit? I need to get out of the situation somehow. And then Luciferianism popped up, because I was working with Lucifer. I'm still working with Lucifer, but I was heavily working with him at that time, and he was guiding me to Luciferianism. He told me, call him my twin brother, essentially, and he will have the key for you. And I started channeling Luciferianism, and we started to, sort of form a relationship, and I got to know him. I was like, you know what? I want to do a pact with you. I want to be free of this, and I want to, live a happy life, being able to express myself through my art and my workings. And I just, after half a year, quit my job and said, I'm going to become an entrepreneur, just like that, without any experience whatsoever, learning and practicing as I went. And that was just totally unacceptable. People were like, you're fucking stupid. What are you doing? You don't know what you're doing. I maybe not, but I do think, I sort of know where I'm going with that. And whatever happens, it happens. So I formed a pact with him on Walpurgisnacht. That was almost 3 years ago now. On the Witches' Night, and that was in the middle of the night, a grand ritual of making that pact, where a lot of preparation went into that beforehand. And I went out of there, quit my job, and then the necessary synchronicities started to happen, and Luciferianism just plucked me from my reality and placed me into a new one, and I started to know where I had to go with this. Because I always was a graphic artist, and I started to I was also self-taught with that without going to school. I had some skills with editing for a long time, and also with graphic design. So I was like, why not build a company of web design? That could work out. In the end, it did not, but it was a good practice to begin with. So I started doing that. But at that time, Lucifer also told me that, you can get anything you really want. You are a magician after all, and you are God, and the whole awakened through you, not you awakened as God. So, why don't you just, go and jump into the circle and create something? What do you want from life? You have the pact with me, and I'll place you there. It's like, okay. So let's just see what I can do, what I can really manifest. So I really started to heavily work on myself and on the plan that I had, because that is something very important. While you do the magic on one end and the spiritual aspect, you're creating, that change of reality. You also need the physical avenues and within mundane life so that can manifest. So I started to discipline myself with, working out my body, for example, and just like really waking up early in the morning, going out for a run in the cold, going back, working on my business from, I think, 6 o'clock to 12 o'clock, went to work, and then went home to sleep. And I've done that for half a year, and I was, having success with this. But then there was this one girl that came around, and I started to fall in love with her. And I was like, I want that as well. And that was sort of a test for me to see, can I get what I want? And also to test me where I had to learn a lot of lessons. And that's when the whole thing went southways. Like that whole operation with Lucifuge and everything I was doing just blew up in my face. I started to, have the idea of, I learned enough. I think I'm ready. Let me quit my other job that I was doing to make a living, and now be fully self-employed, after I quit my apprenticeship. And after 2 months, I became bankrupt. I did not know why this happened to me at that time. I was totally frustrated and just down. And then I had to magically, save myself somehow, which definitely happened. But from there, I had to just kind of crawl out of that hole that I dug for myself, while Lucifuge was still teaching me very necessary lessons that I needed to learn. And that's where I just sort of moved, first up, down the valley to see the mountaintop again where I wanted to go.
Well, that's probably was a part of it. Is the thing is, and we've talked about it on other episodes, is that sometimes after workings, sometimes after alignments or pacts with certain entities or daemons or daimons, they don't always just give it to you, right away or in an easy fashion. Sometimes they give you a little taste of it and then they slap you with a brick wall, only for you to learn how to get around or over or through that wall. And if it stops you, then you weren't meant for this path anyway, and you slammed into a brick wall. But if you learn how to get around or break through it, then now that has changed everything about you, because that has now become a lesson and helps you see it from a different perspective and vantage point that you wouldn't have had otherwise. And then you build back up again. So it seemed like it was going very well for you, but then it hit that wall. But I think that wall was a part of the overall plan and lesson to lead you right to where you are now, and they do that a lot. And when you're making a pact with the pack master, I think that's probably a very big part of it. That, or maybe you did deviate a little bit, and he felt the need to wake you up, and they do that as well.
Yes, yeah, and everything that happened needed to happen. I need to make these mistakes, because in order for me to be where I want to be in the future and to build my vision of the future for myself, I need to be strong enough to handle that, and therefore I need the necessary magical muscles and the strength to go through a lot of stuff in life, and to be not kicked down and lose momentum. Now, that did happen, and that continuously happens with all of us, where we need to learn certain life lessons in order to grow from it. And then you can definitely see if you're meant for something or if it was not for you. And when you work with Luciferianism, as you said, the pact, the Lord of Pacts, essentially, that's a heavy, intense working that you're doing. And I'm still, working with him on that pact at the, very moment. And it will continue to do so until I essentially leave this planet and this body behind.
That's it. I mean, and you went big, or like I say, go big or go home, and you went big, and I like it as you not only made a pact with an entity, you made a pact with the King of Pacts. So that's like, deciding you want to start running, and then you just go find like an Olympic runner, and you're like, all right, I'm going to run with you. And I like that. Sometimes you have to do that, because you get thrown to the wolves, and you're either going to die or you're going to survive. And if you survive, then you make it out a whole different person than you once were, and that's important. And I think you kind of already answered it, but I like to ask, because everyone's very different on this next question, is what is your thoughts on these entities? Some people believe they are completely individual, like a theistic point of view, which is my point of view, that these are true beings. There are multiple, just vast number of beings out there with their own personalities, I guess you could say, that come with their own feelings, their own teachings, and they're separate. Others believe that they're all one source and they're just different masks of that current. Other people believe that, it is just a current within ourselves that we can only really accept and understand sometimes to see it as an exterior, but really it's all within our own mind. So out of those different forms, what do you resonate with yourself personally?
Okay, well, I went through my whole magic or occult upbringing. I went through different sort of ways of perspectives of looking at that.
You should.
Different realizations with it. And I think I came to an understanding right now that, it comes back to, once again, source, where, everything, God is essentially unconscious and everything has layers. And layers exist because the awareness of the individual self, be it the alpha moment or the omega moment of the beginning and the end, is all within its own consciousness. So the individual soul, goes through all peaks of consciousness itself before it reunites with God or the all. However, the all does exist within the conscious matrix of the individual. And that is the same thing with, demons, gods, daemons, whatever you're working with, that it doesn't matter if us humans were part of their creation or if they existed beforehand, because they exist anyway. But you can definitely see that humans from from ancient times sort of had metaphors and symbols for certain powers that they saw within nature and the universe, and they started worshiping that and giving that energy. And therefore, we sort of created the gods. But these gods could have also existed beforehand, even though we were maybe the ones that initiated these gods to exist upon this earthly plane. Their power source was already there, existing within the universe. So it's both ways, essentially, or that's kind of how I look at it.
I like that. So it's almost, if I'm picking this up correctly, it's almost like an egregoric form, but in a different way, in the sense that maybe these currents are ancient and are from antiquity and have been around for a long time, and maybe they drew us in to give them names, to give them forms, to give them more and more energy, feeding them, making them more powerfully to interact with our life. Is that along the lines? Am I correct in saying that's kind of how your description would be?
Yeah, it's sort of. I would kind of put a stamp on that for sure. I just think it's important to see that even back then, going back thousands of years, where we don't really know what really happened, just because of we have some textbooks and some stories of it. You can go back to the understanding of living in caves, and then being very limited of the knowledge of what the universe is, and then seeing the gods themselves within nature, and then sort of going with that as humanity and our civilization grew, and starting to put more energy behind it, and therefore either opening up a portal to the existing source of something that could be considered a god, or this source and energy became a god because we gave it a certain aspect. That's why you can work with Astarte, for example, but you can work with Astaroth. They still exist at the same time. Both have different mass, but they're all connected to the same source of energy. So that's how I kind of look at it.
I like that. And you nailed it there. I mean, people see forces of nature and they turned it into something. Once upon a time, people, seen the sun and they worshiped the sun, and they thought that was God. Who knows? Maybe it is, but they seen this source, this bringer of light, this giver. They gave it different names over time. Ra, or you can call it Helios, or you can call it many different names. But then there was also lightning bolts that came, and they thought, oh no, the gods are trying to kill us. They're trying to strike us with these bolts of fire from the sky. They're vengeful. And they gave that a name, and many different names over the years. Zeus, for instance. And it's interesting that, then people believed that. Then people feared that. Then people worshipped and revered that. And the more and more energy they gave it, whether that truly was a god or not, still fed that. And I like you said, it's different power currents that have become, it's almost like a river turning into several streams.
Yeah, exactly. That's the best way of putting it, I would say.
No, I love it. I always love hearing people's point of view on that because there's so many different. And there's some people say I don't believe any of this shit. That I believe it's all myself, and there's nothing that exists besides me. And I just summon and crack out of my own brain these different things that help me interpret the world. And I'm like, hey man, do you? If that's what you feel, I love it. So that's what I love about this show, and I love about the occult community. Is as you said earlier, I never am going to judge someone and tell them that they're wrong for their beliefs, because who am I to believe that I am the know-it-all of everything? I mean, I only know my reality and what I've experienced, but I don't know yours.
Yeah, exactly. And every reality is valid. If someone says that it's all just them, that is definitely true, because, also consider that when you do rituals and you call on spirits, that moment of creation is happening right there and then. And you're making the worlds move that a spirit and a god can literally appear in front of you, within you, and cause massive change. You created that. You open up the portals for that to come into your life. And that comes back to the creator aspect of you are being God. And then that doesn't really matter, on how much expanded your consciousness or awareness is of your reality and how it functions. It's all part of the same structure anyway. It's all a fractal composition where you have multiple spirals of different energy patterns. And when you start to look at the grand scale of everything, there's no end to it. But as soon as you stop, you can pinpoint things and you can name tag stuff, and you can sort of see different characteristics of energy. And that's where you have your own gods and understandings of reality.
No, that's very well said. Thank you. No, I agree 100%. Now, I'm looking here at my list. Before we run out of time, we still got a little bit of time left, but I got a handful more things I want to kind of go over with you. And one of them was with your summoning practice. This is another one I like to see different people's individual, workings. As far as summoning, are you, I know a lot of people, and there's nothing wrong with it, they do like to use a circle. It's traditional. It's been used by a lot of people. The circle becomes the home. That's your center of your aura. That's your field of feelings, and that's your center. And a lot of people go by that. I've, for many, many years, used a circle during summoning, and it was only within the last couple years that I have abandoned the circle and a lot of protective things around me. I used to come from a traditional Solomonic background for years, where I did use angel names when working with demons for a long time. And I tried different practices, so it wasn't always Solomonic, but I did follow a certain structure for years until I decided that I am not ever trying to restrain or constrict these things, that I am one with them, and I abandon everything and threw it all to the wind. And when I call upon these forces, I do so face to face with no protection between us, because I look at it as if I'm calling, and I said this in a post the other day, and it got some good resonance to it, is if I'm calling you to my home, I'm not going to leave you on the front porch and stand inside and talk to you through the window. If I'm inviting you, I'm inviting you in. But I don't find that it's wrong for someone else to do the whole window talking, through, because it is safe, and these are very dangerous elements. So can you tell us what your thoughts are on the magical circle and, what your practice involves? And ladies and gentlemen, real quick, I want to say that I could be looked at as a hypocrite, because the name or the tagline of my show is "Step into the Circle," and I don't use a circle, folks.
Yeah, I like that, and that's a good segue into tools and within the magical craft. Now, I personally, I use tools, I use circles, and I also do not. And actually, it's sort of the same with me, where I sort of gradually started to abandon the circles and the tools, because one day I just, especially starting with this, I didn't have many tools. So, I had to make use of what I had, which were myself and other things that I created from that. So I always learned from the very beginning that, because of my background, that I do not need a sort of protective seal around me when I'm working with specific spirits. You got to be cautious, because there's definitely danger involved. But essentially, if you want to call on a god, you can establish a connection with that through the seal and sigil. You can draw it on paper. You can open it up through specific techniques if you know how to do that. And right then and there, you can, get a connection with them. And as soon as you have that, or even without a sigil, you can start, vibrating their names and, focusing on them and their essence, and they can come through you as you are just, another archetype of the all. In your microcosm of what you are, and that's sort of how I do it. Sometimes if I feel like really doing a whole evocation, I will put up my circle and I will also put up a triangle and really do the necessary steps to have a full materialization. But that's rarely happening nowadays because time is of the value sometimes, and I do a lot of stuff. So sometimes I just I already have previous connections with spirits, and I sit down and meditate for a few minutes. Get into a trance state and then communicate with them. Or I go out into nature and just consecrate whatever I have with me. If there's a stone on my path and I can look at that stone and say, hey, you're going to become a divine vessel for a spirit I'm going to call on right now, that's how I work with it. And then I throw the stone somewhere and on the floor, and I let the spirit appear through it, or I hold it in my hands. So that's sort of how I work with spirits. I either invoke them, evoke them. I don't really have any boundaries because I started to practice magic and learn how to do magic without any tools. Because what is all the tools worth for you and your altars and stuff like that? If you go about your day and you're running errands, and there's something happening to you, you cannot really just grab your afami or your candles or your circles and do something like that. Like right then and there, if you need magic, what do? So I started to learn how to affect the world just by me and by using energy work and stuff like that.
You have to. That's important because, as you said, when you're on the go, you're not going to have your altar, you're not going to have your candles or any of that with you. You have to know how to be able to manipulate energy and do certain things on the go. You also mentioned something I like, which I am a certain practitioner in, which is going out into nature. I find that working in my temple, don't get me wrong, my temple is home. I'm in it right now. I do everything in here, from my radio shows to reading to my writings. I'm working on a book right now. Everything I do is here, but most especially my ritual work and meditations. But I love this room, but I love going out into nature because a beautiful summer day, go a couple miles into the woods, hike up a mountain, sit next to a stream, no one in sight, no one can hear you, and you just go into a full ritual, and you will feel the winds of change sweep through that forest like nothing you've ever felt before, because now you are not confining these energies to just a small room. You are letting them blow free. And not only, if you're working with demons or angels or spirits of the dead, whatever you might be working with, you can also work with natural plant spirits and spirits of the earth and of the forest. And some of the results you'll get when you are out and about in the woods is amazing. And it's something, if you've never tried and you're a serious practitioner, folks, I would suggest going into the forest far in by yourself. Be smart and be safe. But just sit down, meditate for a while, and then begin your practice. And you will notice some wild things happen, from almost like the trees come alive to sometimes animals will have a strange attraction to you, where an animal you might have never even seen in person, like a fox or anything like that, will come up within feet of you and stand there and stare at you, not afraid, because it is telling you something. And it's a wild thing. I am a big fan of nature magic.
Oh yeah, well, nothing beats nature, and especially outside rituals, because it's just a very different energy. Now, within our modern society here in the West, we do not have temples that are specifically built with like tantric or geometric structures like you can see them in India, where you have certain frequencies that are building up. Now, you do have that within a temple, and you call for spirits, and it accumulates. But when you're outside in nature, it's just pure and it's sort of untouched, and you can tap into, magical energy sometimes even way easier than it would be within your own temple or house. And it's simply amazing. As you said, you're standing there, for example, and you're doing a ritual, and the winds of change necessarily just blow through you, and you can feel it around you way more than you are, isolated within your circle or your temple. And then the world itself starts talking to you, literally in that moment. Like I went into the forest at night at so many times at 3 a.m. It's very spooky. With only my athami, So I could only imagine if someone would have saw me, just walking through the woods with a black hood on and doing a ritual, they would have been scared for the rest of their life. But I was actually the one that was sort of spooked by this. But it was a practice, and sort of like going through my own limits and just say like, hey, let's do a ritual at the night, right outside in the middle of the black forest, and call on very dark spirits. And that's essentially what you're opening up, and you're going to have some very wild experiences for sure.
No, you are. It takes me back to last year. It was like late summer, getting close to fall, and I went out to a very known paranormally active location deep into the woods that had some wild experiences at. I performed a late-night ritual under one of the most magnificent lightning storms that I've seen in my entire life. And that wasn't planned. I was planning to go out and do this ritual. It just happened to this massive storm hit us. And all night long, giant lightning bolts were flashing across the sky, and it's pitch black. There's no light anywhere. And it made for a very amazing scene. The energy was charged, and I'll never forget, midway through at the pinnacle and the zenith of my ritual, as I am really just in the zone and trance and chanting out, a lightning bolt came down and struck the tree directly beside me and split it in half. Sounds like a movie. Sounds like a movie
Wow.
moment, but it actually happened. It was what makes it so crazy. And the tree fell and landed probably within 12 feet of me. And then we're talking a log that if it would have landed on top of me, it would have killed me instantly. And it
Wow.
struck this tree, it snapped, and it fell down right behind me, and boom! And as it did, I felt this, and probably it was the lightning as well, but I felt this unworldly force go through my body, which for a brief moment felt like I was levitating. And then all of a sudden it dropped, and it just out of the air, and it was pitch black, and I'm looking around, and right around that same time, a very cool thing happened. Is normally, as we said, when you have a temple, you're centering your focus to a triangle of manifestation or to a certain pinpoint. When you're out in the woods, you can't do that. And behind me, I started hearing what sounded like a congregation of people talking to one another, just several muffled voices behind me. When I turn around, it's just nothing but trees and pitch black woods. But you could clearly hear several people talking to one another. It was one of the most amazing experiences that I've ever experienced, and I've had some pretty good ones, but this one was very unique and special. So like we said, folks, nature can bring about massive things in your rituals. So I suggest it. And we have a listener comment here. We have from Destiny Ray. She says, what do you think about tattoo sigil magic? Opinions and beliefs. And I'll let you take this one because I got to be honest with you, I've never really messed with tattoo sigil magic, so I don't know much about it.
Oh, well, if there's a whole practice to that, I never, heard of a specific path where, that's like just commonly practiced. But I think, any type of sigil or symbol that is placed upon your skin becomes, as any other sigil, an open gateway. But once you have it on your skin and on your physical vessel, you're going to have that forever until you die or you carve it out. So it's an continuous power surge that is coming from a spirit or a certain symbol that gives your body and vessel a certain power. It also enables that power to open up a gateway and locking things up. Because I do have magical tattoos, but I am very cautious when it comes to spirit sigils. Because if I could never tell you if I would do a spirit sigil on my sleeve somewhere or on my body, because that is definitely an open gateway, and you have to be really dedicated to that spirit and want to have that spirit with you for the rest of your life. So I always I have these gods and goddesses and spirits within me, and I can call them if I want to. But what if I ever decide to not work with a specific deity again, because I do not know, maybe that could happen. So I sort of try to stay away from that right now. But that could definitely change, as I change my opinion of myself all the time.
Well, I think it's important to refining yourself as constant change needs to happen. If you find yourself to a point where you don't feel there's any more change to be had, that you or it, where I'm at now is all I ever need to be, then you obviously failed. And then you probably need to start over again. So the constant change is a good thing. And I agree with you there. I know of tattooing sigils on oneself, obviously. If there's a full practice of this as like a path, I don't know about it, but yeah, I agree with you there, is you have to be very cautious upon doing so, because even if you like working with a deity, hand in hand, day in and day out, once you put that on there, maybe then all of a sudden it's giving you too much of its current, and you don't want that, and there's really nothing you can do at that point. And who's to say by lasering it off or cutting it off or branding it off that it's gone, because now you've embedded it into the very fabric of your vessel, of your being. So even if you laser remove it, it might now be in you forever. And as Aserial said, you can call upon these things and then ask them to leave and let them return, give them license to depart. But if you put it on your skin, there is no license to depart. It's there forever. So I don't know. I can't say that I don't have certain occult symbolisms all over me, but I don't have a specific sigil. It has been something I've pondered on for a few years now, as there's some areas that I want to finish out on my body. I only have a couple left, but I don't know. It's something that I've been hesitant on for that exact reason, because I don't know, once I put it on, what if things go awry.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat with that when it especially comes to spirit sigils. Yeah, just gotta be careful, But one thing I also see when it comes to that is like, when you call a spirit into your life, that spirit comes from within as it comes from without. So the door is always really open. The only thing that really changes is your perception to it. It never really truly shuts anyway, but you can just sort of close your awareness to that. But yeah, definitely, I'm also very cautious when it comes to spiritual sigils on my sleeve.
No, I agree.
My buddy.
I agree 100%. Well, we're running short on time here, so I guess to finish it out, actually, there's another comment that just popped up. Interesting. I bring it up because I'm noticing some synchronicities after getting a sigil and key tattoos on me from the Citra Arca. I can't talk tonight. I don't know what the hell's going on. This specific entity has made it so my spoken word is reality in short order, positive and negative. I have to be so careful with how I speak now. Was just wondering your thoughts. See, that could be a thing right there, Destiny, that, if you've put it on you and if it's caused a massive internal change where now it's given you powers that you once did not have, and once you say something, it comes to fruition, that could be looked at as a blessing, but that could also be looked at as a curse. Because what happens when you get angry? Someone makes you angry that you love, and in the heat of the moment, say something you don't mean to that person, and then boom, it happens. And then there's no taking it back. So that could be looked at as something, that's not a beneficial path. So I don't know. It's an interesting topic. I might have to bring that up with other guests on my show. I really appreciate you throwing that out there, and obviously being a dedicated listener. I think you come in pretty much every show that I have and always leave input, questions, and support us. So we appreciate your support. Before we finish up,
what's their name?
Destiny Ray. She
Destiny Ray, could you please somehow contact me and sort of give me that titule, because I'm actually very interested in that. That just really intrigued me.
No, absolutely, Destiny, you heard it. Make sure you message Aserial and talk to him a little bit about what you're talking to us about tonight. He would love to hear more. And I know we talk from time to time, so we can always talk a little bit more about it as well. And I have stories about heat of the moment for a different day. Well, certainly we can bring it up on a different show. I always love the topics. Which brings me to a point, guys, before we finish up, and I have Aserial tell us the last couple things here. If you have anything you want to hear us do, like I said before, anything you want to hear us do differently, any suggestions, make sure you drop us a line at celestialoddities@gmail.com. If you're just tuning in or just recently tuned in and you missed the beginning of the show, don't fret. Once it's over of the live portion, it is available for download and streaming after the fact, and you can jump back to the beginning and listen to the whole thing. And we always suggest it. I ask you click the like, share, and follow buttons on all the platforms to get us out there, and make sure you check out all of our past episodes as well. Before I jump into who our next few guests are and wrap up for the evening, Aserial, I would like you to tell us anybody you would like to thank, anything that you have upcoming that we should be keeping an eye out for, and lastly, any type of piece of advice you would like to give to anybody out there starting in the occult and lost and not sure what to do.
All right. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you, definitely, for bringing me on. First of all, I had a blast. Also, well, when it comes to the project, if you are now interested in what I do, who I am, if you want to check me out, make sure to do that at Aserial Krabat on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and on Facebook, because there's a lot of new projects coming out. I am also working together closely with Connor Candle, for example. We are planning to do more group rituals because we had massive success with a lot of people that were, a part of these things last year. So we're going to continue to do that. Also, if you're interested in consultations, ritual hires, I also offer this as well. So that's sort of what I can say about, that and me. If you want to check me out, do so and go ahead. And also for any type of, person that's starting with all of this, is that, just kind of make sure that you are following I wouldn't say a leader or someone that is, talking about what you want to hear. Just make sure that you are following what you feel like is really resonating with you, and then go with that. And then also make sure that you are, learning, by your practice, by clocking into the ritual circle, whatever you practice you do, learning directly from these forces, and start to implement these within your life. Study, learn, and then, do whatever you essentially like and become who you want to be.
Those are two huge pieces of advice, folks, is follow what resonates with you. If it doesn't feel right, there's probably a reason it doesn't, so you need to cut ties with it until you find the right thing. This isn't a race. It's something that's a day in and day out practice for the rest of your life. Too many people want to jump from neophyte to adept overnight, and it doesn't happen that way. This is something you will never reach the zenith of. You will continue to work for the rest of your life at it. So follow what feels right. If it doesn't, find something else to follow within it until you find that path that specifically resonates with you. I certainly love that statement there. And as Aserial said, do it. That's the biggest thing. Stop reading the books. It's okay to read them. I'm not telling you don't read, but jump into the circle, or in my case, not the circle, whatever you want to do. But it's important that you step into the temple, into, your altar space, and do the work. Too many people just read and research for years and years and years, and you're like, what success have you had? I never actually have done a ritual. Why do you follow it then? Get in there and find out what you're capable of. Now, before we close out for the night, Aserial just mentioned Connor Kendall, which is actually our guest next week on the 18th from 8 to 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Excuse me. So we will have Connor Kendall on, or he also goes by the Infernal Blisk. The following week, I'm very excited for this. I'm excited for all of them, but for the 25th, I have kind of a spin for you guys. We've been getting very dark lately, which obviously is the kind of the root of our show. But on the 25th, we have Maximus Tyrannus Avery, and he is going to be talking about his new book of the Shemhem Maporish Angel System, which I have read several different books on this system over the years, and I got to be honest, folks, this is the most beautiful, powerful, well-executed system of angelic evocation magic that you will come across, or that I have come across in quite a while. So I have actually done some of the rituals from it, and I told everybody I might be a black magician, but I love working with angels. And I can tell you what, there's been some wild experiences that have happened from this book, and we'll talk a little bit about that. That is on the 25th. And then next month, March 11th, 18th, and 25th, we have back-to-back weeks of first Necro Nikki. We have Billy Myers from Dark Star Products, as we talked about earlier, my newest sponsor of the show. And on the 25th, we have Anasa Rose, and we'll be talking about Hecatean magic, which is obviously my root of my being and my practice every single day. So I'm very excited for the next several guests. Make sure you check them out. And other than that, we want to thank you so much for listening tonight and supporting the show. Make sure you go to Aserial's pages, follow him, like him, buy his book, buy his work, support him in any way you can, share him around, and get his name out there, because this young man needs to be heard, and we're going to certainly do what we can to make that happen. So other than that, that's all I have for the night, folks. Aserial, thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. It was a blast.
Absolutely. Well, hey, we'll catch you next time, and ladies and gentlemen, you have a wonderful night. See you later. This is Knights of the Nephilim.
See you soon.